Hi, good afternoon. Today we are going to be looking at starting a new unit, as discussed, which is going to be performance and reward management. And in this unit, what we're going to be looking at covering is the learning outcome 1 today, with regards to understanding basic things like the basic concept of performance management and the concept of reward management. So what I've done, as always, is basically put together a few slides using the PowerPoint presentation, and this is something which is also available on Moodle, along with a handout which will detail out some of the things that I am going to be covering in the presentation slides for learning outcome 1. Now let's look at briefly starting off by discussing why is there an importance, what is the importance of managing performance? Why do you think managers look at managing performance? There are a couple of reasons that I can look at which come to our mind. When you look at delegating work, when you look at entrusting work, or basically look at giving work within the team which is to be accomplished, meeting a target or a strategic objective, at some stage you get into the process of something called review. Now, there's a very thin line differentiation. When I say review, it's quite different. When I say it's not thin line, it is quite different from doing a review. And against that, putting performance or reward management. Now, review as an approach is slightly different, is because here you're looking at from a supervisory perspective or as a line manager perspective, looking at basically reviewing the work that has been given, so that has the work been completed, has it been done to the delivery in terms of the standard set, or is it meeting the objective or criteria which has been defined when the work was given to the colleague. But when we look at performance management, we are looking at basically talking about the carrot and stick approach in short, which is to look at a longer perspective or a long-term perspective of ensuring that people who work within the organization are able to understand the objectives set and are able to progressively work towards those objectives to achieve them, and thereby helping the organization achieve these strategic objectives as a whole. So when we look at performance management, we will define it as a process through which you're looking at rewarding your employees, your staff, people who work for you or work within the organization. And here the idea of putting the context of performance is to give them objectives which need to be met, and these objectives can be measured and can be, there's an option wherein the line managers, the department heads, the top management in the organization has the ability to be able to feedback on that objectives being set and the delivery being done. And at some stage, these objectives help in the overall fulfillment of the strategic objective of the organization. Now, when we talk about the concept of reward management or reward in general, we are talking about the carrot and stick approach, because you have people working for you within the organization, and as an HR manager, you are looking at devising incentive schemes or perks or remuneration which are commensurate to the responsibility or the roles and responsibility given to the employees. And under this context is what we look at basically talking about, reward management. So from that context, what we look at is, the whole aspect of performance and managing, the performance of the employees and rewarding them to meet a certain set criteria on achievement of these targets is important for an HR manager to understand how you devise a reward, how do you put a reward management strategy in place, if I may use that word, and what are the key elements and objectives of putting that into place, so that you have that approach wherein you are able to measure the performance not only of the employees but also able to reward them as they look at achieving those objectives set forth by the organization. So here in this particular unit, you are looking at gaining, the theoretical and practical understanding of the diverse approaches of performance and reward management, which are used by most organizations and by HR managers in particular to, look at getting the output, productivity, efficiency from the staff or the employees working within the organization. So with this broad understanding, let's look at getting into the slides that I put together for today's session, and in which I'm looking at the definition of performance management first, wherein I'm saying that it is a technique through which you're looking at realizing the objectives of the organization, and in return rewarding the employees for helping you or the organization to achieve those strategic objectives. Now here we are looking at understanding some of the theories, the theories of performance management. We are looking at how performance management is done, what is a performance management cycle, and last but not the least, how do we ensure that the employees at some stage, when you look at the skills performance gap, you are putting the right set of employees and giving them the roles and responsibilities for which they have the skills and the experience to execute them, thereby ensuring that there is a success at the end of it rather than a failure. Now, the first thing that we also look at when we look at performance management is we need to understand, after we know why we look at performance appraisals, and I think a lot of organizations, when you look at do performance appraisals annually. Now, when these appraisals are done, they take different formats. Sometimes you call them as self-performance appraisals. That means the employee would actually, apprise himself in terms of the appraisal first. Once that has been done, the appraiser, the person or their line manager would basically sit down with you and go through the basics of what you filled into the performance appraisal, and then review it to say that, okay, this is what you've said you met, this is what you've said not met, and this is the area wherein we put training and development in place for you to be able to better your performance or better the delivery or the output that you give in certain circumstances when you are delivering the roles and responsibilities given. Now, in that whole process, we look at managing the performance of the employees through something called PMC, or performance management cycle. And this performance management cycle essentially has 5 steps which are repeated by HR managers and department managers when they do annual appraisals. And these steps are repeated to reinforce the whole process of why performance management is put into place, and is put into place as a criterion for HR and for senior management to be able to review that the employees they've recruited and have been entrusted with roles and responsibilities are actually delivering those roles and responsibilities effectively. So let's look at the performance management cycle, and this cycle basically consists of 5 steps. So first of all, the management or your line manager would set up your objectives. These are part of your key result areas or part of your job description in general. But if you're not new to the organization, every year you're given a set of KRAs to execute or work on, and these are called key result areas, or nothing short of something called objectives. In the second step, what you really look at is, once you've started to work on some of these objectives, at some stage, most organizations either have a quarterly, 6-monthly, or an annual review, and that is where they look at analyzing what you've achieved against the set benchmarks which have been done, and that is something which leads to something called performance of measurement of performance. The third step in this cycle would be to look at giving feedback. Now, sometimes you see in a situation, if you're a sales manager or if you're working within business development, what you normally tend to see is that your review of performance is done every month. You're given targets monthly, and whether you're achieving or not achieving those targets monthly are evaluated by your manager, or by your regional manager, or by your general manager. Now here, the advantage is that the general manager or your manager is able to essentially give you feedback on why you've not been able to achieve the results. Have you done an outreach to your customers? Have you gone out and met them? Have you reached, your outreach has been enough, not enough? Have you seeked new customers if the performance was not happening, or if the targets were not being met? And in some cases, the feedback focuses on understanding the gap areas, which could be promotions are required, marketing is required, you need a bit of outreach which needs to be done, or if you've had loss of some customers, then you need to go out and look out and develop new customers. So feedback on performance results is given by managers. Now, if you're achieving on the targets being set, sales targets being set, for example, in those cases, it is generally seen within all departments now, whether it's sales, marketing, business development, accounts, logistics, engineering, production, there is a reward system or a reward mechanism in place. If you're able to meet the output, then the whole team gets rewarded, or the individual responsible for achieving the target gets rewarded, and that reward system actually kicks into place. A simple example of that would be when you achieve again your sales every month, you have a certain bonus which kicks in, or a multiplier on the bonus which kicks in, and that tends to be something called a reward system which has been put in place by HR for all sales managers achieving those targets to be able to get that additional bonus or pay into the salary or your wages every month. Then at some stage we also look at that there are amendments to objectives and activities which are done because there's a course correction. So for example, if other sales managers are not performing, sometimes if you're performing well, you're given a bit of stretch target, and these are leading to what are called amendments to objectives or your targets on a monthly basis, which means that you end up doing more activities, and these activities then become a part and parcel of your KRA. Now, if I have to, this was broadly, but if I have to get into a bit more detail, then this part of the cycle, which is performance management cycle, has 5 parts to it. And the first part involves planning. The second involves monitoring. The third involves developing. The fourth part is primarily looking at rating and the whether you met the performance on a scale of 1 to 5, whatever the performance system or the management performance measurement system is, which is looking at rating. Say for example, in schools, kids normally have the traffic light system, which is red, amber, green. If they're meeting targets, it's green. If they're basically meeting those standards, they're green. In sales, normally you will have a system where you're meeting 100%, over 110%, 125%, things like that. And that would be rating. You have good, excellent, outstanding. In the case of Ofsted, when inspections are done, quality management systems look at rating like average or say poor, outstanding, good, and excellent. So some sort of a rating system. And the fifth part in the performance management cycle is primarily looking at focusing on rewards. So there are bits that go into this process, and that process involves, when we say the performance management cycle, it involves, if I have to write it here, performance management cycle, that has 5 parts to it, or 5 steps to it, and they include planning, monitoring, we look at developing, rating the performance, and obviously, appropriately then to the best performers, giving rewards, which could be in the form of promotions, increments, bonus, incentives, trips, holiday trips, things like that, depending on the organization that you work. Now, after having understood the concept broadly, let's look at 1 or 2 theories which basically are used primarily with regards to the concept of performance management. Now, the first theory that we look at is the goal setting theory. And the goal setting theory primarily looks at, if I have to summarize this here in this slide, the goal setting theory was developed by Edwin Locke in 1968. Now, this particular theory basically suggests that each individual or people working within the organization are given goals which are established on their skill set. And it is these kind of roles or the targets goals are essentially given, keeping in mind their skill set, their prior experience, and also the ability which will keep them motivated and loyal to the organization. Now, sometimes, and the reason why this is done is that sometimes you will see that employees who have been working or staff who have been working within an organization have the same set of goals and objectives. They get monotonous in some cases, and when these goals become monotonous or they become usual goals, you tend to see that there's a bit of slacking happening, or the goals are not being achieved, or not being achieved to the level at which they need to be achieved. So here the goal setting theory looks at primarily giving goals on the basis of skills, prior experience, and also the motivation which motivation factor which the employees have within the organization, to make them more realistic and something which is achievable from that person's perspective or that person's caliber point of view. So in this case, you will generally see that the performance improves as a result, because the achievement of performance is primarily aimed at setting newer goals, and those newer goals lead to some sort of a reward or an incentive for the employee, which keeps them not only motivated but also keeps them performing within that role. Now, if I look at giving you an example of the goal setting theory in a bit more detail, you're looking at basically setting goals which are related and aligned to the guidelines of the business. That means they are aligned with the strategic objectives of the business and is normally set by the management. Now, these goals, when they are set using the goal setting theory, have 5 clear parts to it. That means the goals which are set have clarity, they have challenge. They also look at challenging the abilities of the individual so that they are motivated to be in that role and perform and get that output. We seek commitment within the employees, and at some stage this part of the theory also looks at getting feedback and also defining what is task complexity. That means you're not setting up tasks which the employee cannot do because of the skill set not being there. But if you feel that this skill is not there, then the gap is identified. And what tends to happen is the HR department or the HR manager then puts some sort of a training and development program in place for the employee to be able to achieve those goals and objectives. The second theory that we look at is something called the expectancy theory. And again, if I look at summarizing the theory, what it talks about is that this was proposed by Victor Broom in 1964, and this theory basically looks at the individual's behavior and what is the anticipated outcome or the achievement of goals that they can do prior to giving them the roles and responsibilities. So here the individuals can modify. Sometimes you see that performers joining the organization perform quite well for a few months, few years, and after a point in time, their performance tends to fall. So here in this case, sometimes what you have to do is modify the goals and the the roles and responsibilities given depending on the anticipated behavior of the individual, so that it still leads to the achievement of goals for the organization. Now, this theory typically underlies the concept of performance management because it believes that performance is influenced by expectations concerning future events. Now, this is a very important part because when you look at expectancy, we are talking about what is the individual's expectation, what is the organization's expectation. So here, the performance is it is assumed that the performance is going to be influenced by the expectations the individual have, for future events. And in those cases, you see expectancy theory being applied. Now, if I look at, briefly talking about the type of rewards that before we get into the other parts of the learning outcome, I think it's imperative for me to look at just briefly defining rewards. Now, rewards are of two types. There is extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. Now, when we look at intrinsic reward, what we are meaning is that the reward, you're trying to reward a person, the person is basically looking at rewarding himself or herself. They are basically, personally driven. So the individuals are personally driven. And in this case, what you will see is that they have an attachment to the work or to the organization that they're working for. And in this case, they have a sense of purpose. And when you look at the sense of purpose, they are kind of motivated to be able to perform that work. An example here that I would give you is primarily looking at a graphics designer who basically is who has taken up a work, and what he finds is that he does not have all the ins and outs about the work, and his skills maybe are lacking, but the person works towards learning the skills required to work efficiently in that role, and then stands, in a way wherein he is bringing benefits, or his work is being beneficial for the company. Now, the person in this case, when you look at intrinsic reward, is basically self-motivated, and he thinks that without him, if he doesn't put in, the utmost quality of work, that would mean that the organization would suffer and the work would not be achieved. So he is self-driven, or he or she is self-driven and self-motivated in this case. Now, when we look at extrinsic rewards, what we are looking at is that the individuals are looking at expecting rewards from the organization. That means, you could be rewarded by the organization or somebody external to the organization. So here, the person generally fulfills the organization work or the roles and responsibilities given on time, and is then rewarded, for meeting that task. Now, this reward in some cases could be tangible, material, or it could be a tangible incentive, and that drives the individual to be more motivated to be able to, obviously achieve, the task set. And here, what you will normally see is that the employees are motivated because there is a sense of achievement, and also they feel a bit of proud in achieving that thing, but also expect a reward in return, which has been set as per the, say, for example, the HR policy in terms of the bonus or the incentive set out, when you meet the targets and the objective. Now, when I look at, say, for example, the second assessment criteria in terms of, looking at, briefly looking at, what is the psychology of reward management. So when I look at that, what we are primarily looking at is, the psychology of reward management, meaning that we are basically trying to see how do we put some sort of a reward management in place, which is basically looking at some sort of why is reward management required? So why do the organizations need to put the a reward strategy in place? So when we look at that in particular, what we look at is we need to understand the basic bits in terms of say, for example, the let me put it this way, what I meant is that you need to look at the psychology. So if I define the word psychology, psychology would mean that, okay, we are looking at the background of the study through which, we understand why, we need to put as HR managers some sort of a reward mechanism in place. So if I have to look at definition, what we are looking at is reward management is more concerned with the formulation and implementation of some sort of a strategy or a policy which is enacted year on year within the organization and treats people, fairly and justly in accordance to the roles and responsibilities given. And when they achieve those responsibilities or objectives, they are rewarded, appropriately, which keeps them motivated and loyal to the organization. So a reward system normally would consist of, within an organization, some sort of a policy or some sort of a system which has been designed to administer, some sort of rewards. When I say rewards, we're talking about incentives, bonuses, things like that. And they tend to be, they tend to kick into action the moment these objectives are achieved. So when you look at a simple example, every year we have performance appraisals. And if you've seen to be, if you've met your performance targets which have been set, you're due for a pay increase or you're due for, an incentive or a promotion. So this is a simple example of a reward management system in place within organizations wherein year on year when you have your appraisals, you're primarily looking at, getting a pay increase, and that pay increase essentially allows you to, look at getting a reward in place because you've met your objectives. So let's look at some of the aims and achievements of, aims and objectives of reward management. Now, a reward system needs to look at two perspectives. One, from an organizational strategy perspective, that it is set so that the organization's goals and objectives are met. And at the same time, it is also looking at the objectivity of the employee's expectation being met when the output or the target is being delivered. So there are there could be many variations in terms of how a strategy is put in place by the organization, but the basic underlying objective of reward management is primarily to look at reward employees so that they basically feel motivated and loyal to the organization and achieve the objectives set out or given by the management. Now, if I have to detail them out in terms of some of the aims of reward management, we could briefly list them out in bullet points like this, which basically talk about things like rewarding people according to what they help achieve the organization, and their contributions to the organization. You could look at creating a reward system which values the organization itself. So here an example would be, when you look at reward and compensation, here an example would be that when you look at companies like Google, Facebook, they have a pension plan in place, they have an annual dental plan in place, they have a bonus structure in place. They also, small organizations have some sort of incentive schemes in place. So if you achieve this, you get that much extra, in wage. You achieve that, or you deliver on this objective, you're able to get in something in return. Now, this is primarily done within an organization to develop something called a performance culture. That means task orientation and achievement of those tasks then leads to some sort of a reward which the employee is able to get or the staff is able to get. And the underlying assumption in this case is any such reward system looks at a few expectations in terms of commitment, engagement, motivation, and obviously loyalty from an individual when they are working within the organization. Now, some reward systems when I look at when they are developed, and one of the objectives put forward is also to look at having a positive employment relationship and a psychological contract with the employee when these things are put in place. So when you look at high positions, which are senior management positions above general manager, vice president, president, and above, or CEO, you look at that there are these reward management strategies or the aims and objective of putting that in place. You see substantial rewards also put in place. So the roles and responsibilities are higher, but also the achievement of those gives them higher incentives or payouts, which are in the form of employee stock option plans. It could be in the form of payment options, or bonuses, which are almost equal to their pay packages. Now, the key bit in this is the HR has to get a balance between what the employee will get rewarded on, and what will be the objective in terms of setting the reward at, so that the employees are motivated enough to be able to achieve that objective and get a fair compensation in lieu of that. And these systems have to be seen to be operating fairly, so that they treat employees justly in accordance with what has been defined in the policy of the organization, or sometimes they see it is called the felt fair principle, which basically means that all employees in that performing a certain function or having a certain responsibility are rewarded aptly depending on the output of performance they have done as far as the organization is concerned. So from that aspect, what we do get to see is that these are the aims of the system when HR puts it in place, and the idea is to basically look at operating them transparently. Again, the underlying factors being motivation, loyalty, commitment, and engagement from employees to be able to have that, to be able to have that on the system and help in the achievement of objectives set for the individual. Now, when we look at the reward management system, this is an example of one that I put up on screen, wherein this has certain elements and certain aspects to it, and there are broadly, any such system which works is primarily done because it needs to align with the business and HR strategy of the organization. The reward strategy then looks at, creating tiers which help in better achievement of the objective set as per the skills, the experience, and loyalty and motivation of the employee. So they look at job evaluation, they look at certain things like grade and pay structure, market rate analysis, contingency pay. So just to give you an example and briefly explain this. Now, when you look at applying for a position or a job position in the market, you normally look at benchmarking it against, when the HR manager puts it out, they will basically look at benchmarking that position and the responsibilities with regards to some of the competitors in the market. There will be some sort of a analysis, evaluation which has been done before the job description is created. Once that has been created, what pay and grade structure they will fall in, and how that relates to market when they look at competitors. And in some cases, when you find employees, what are the basic benefits that they would get after they clear the interview and join the organization, what allowances they get, and how their KRAs or key result areas will be measured under the performance management system. And in some cases, all individuals will also be entitled to, in organizations, to get non-financial rewards. That would mean things like dental insurance, things like medical plan, things like a pension, which is a non-financial reward, but that is given across to all employees working within the organization. That then constitutes something called the total remuneration, or the total package for the job that you're applying for. And over and above this, what you will get to see is that there are allowances, performance management incentives, bonuses, or non-financial rewards. Things like if you've achieved your target, there was a scheme and the company sent you out on a holiday trip, for 3 days, 4 nights, or a 6-night, 7-day holiday trip. Now that's a non-financial reward because the company is paid for it, but the employee who has achieved the target or helped in the achievement of that target has been given that reward by the company, and that would mean that also becomes a part and parcel of the overall package. Now, when we look at defining certain components, we are looking at transactional rewards and relational rewards. Transactional rewards include things which are a part of your basic pay package. They include a bit of contingency pay, things like if you've done a bit of overtime, you've been asked to put in more time or more work on a particular project, then that is contingency pay. Things like maternity pay, paternity leave might come into contingency pay for organizations because that happens, and they have to accommodate and allocate for that. And then last but not the least, employee benefits, things like pension, training and development, which are provided as packages, part and parcel of your package, constitutes what is called the total remuneration. Now, when I look at relational rewards, these constitute things like learning and development. That means the trainings which the company pays for, and the kind of work experience that you bring in externally when you join an organization, for which you might have a certain amount of higher pay as compared to individuals working within that similar role within the organization. You might get certain higher pay and benefits or perks because you have higher work experience in that particular sector. And because of your work experience, you are getting slightly higher pay. And some of these then classify as what is called the work experience rewards. And all of these transactional and relational awards constitute something called the total reward. Now, the main aim of having this is to have a combined impact of ensuring that you earn more, you are taken care of by the organization, whichever way we put it. But the main aim is to look at driving a motivation, commitment, and engagement, in terms of your role and responsibility, along with commitment to be able to achieve organizational goals. Now, one of the other things that we will look at is primarily the Towers parent model of total reward management. And this particular model, is like a quadrant wherein you compare, you have pay and benefits, and you have learning, development, and work environment, which is basically the type of, a compartmentalization of rewards, reward management, which can be done. So the upper two quadrants essentially focus on benefits like pay and, benefit. The upper two quadrants focus on pay and benefits, and they are predominantly financial in nature. And by contrast, when we look at, the lower quadrants primarily are non-financial in nature in terms of reward, and they tend to focus on, providing you the right, working environment within the office, opportunities for growth or career development, and last but not the least, recognition. So some of the organizations you will see also recognize employees. If you worked 5 years within the organization, you get a watch. If you're recognized 10 years within the organization, you get an award. And, those kind of things are part and parcel of something called, the lower quadrant, which are relational awards relating to learning and development and obviously work environment. Now, last but not the least, let's look at how do we evaluate performance management. Now, when we look at, performance, we need to be able to have some, set benchmark criteria through which we can actually evaluate how a person is doing or how an individual is performing within that role. Now, there are in general 6 performance management strategies which most organizations employ, and they tend to basically focus on the bullet points that I've highlighted here, things like defining and communicating, the company goals clearly and why these are aligned with your performance management. Now, if this communication is not done, at the right time, at the right place, in the right manner, you will seldom see that the employees do not have the same understanding of what the company's goals are, and that is why the performance tends to stutter with regards to the achievement of objectives. Now, sometimes we also look at utilizing performance management softwares. Now, because as more and more people work within organizations, it is quite paper-driven, this process. So what most companies have done is they've installed certain softwares or taken help of certain softwares because of the use of IT, and that allows them to look at performance management techniques or performance management appraisals which can be done on the system. We look at as one of the key strategies being that you have to offer frequent feedback. That means the frequency of feedback has to be timely, and that is defined in the organizational policy. Now, most sales organizations have weekly, monthly feedbacks. Most marketing-driven organizations or product-driven organizations have, weekly, monthly feedbacks. Most quality production engineering-driven organizations have, monthly, quarterly, and 6 monthly feedbacks. And most large businesses have, what is called the frequency of, 12 months, 18 months, because there are objectives which are defined across a larger period of time, and that is where the frequency then decreases. Now, some organizations also use peer reviews. Sometimes you will see in teaching organizations, training organizations, large engineering, manufacturing organizations that peer reviews are also done, and that is a technique through which HR department essentially utilizes individuals working within the same team to do their reviews or their peer reviews, colleague reviews, which helps them give indirect and informal feedback to the achievements or the working methodology of on their working methodology. We also look at preemptive management and recognition. Most organizations also look at setting up regular meetings. And last but not the least, when you say preemptive management meetings and discussions and recognitions, is that sometimes you will see organizations define at the start of the new financial year, what kind of rewards are going to be put in place, what is the reward mechanism, what is the policy in place. So this year, if the organization is looking at a target of say 100 million, they would set out a reward that anybody achieving, and if the organization achieves this particular sales goal or the revenue goal, then all employees within the organization will be in line for some sort of a bonus or some sort of a recognition. So these are the broad strategies through which performance appraisal can be done. And when we look at performance appraisal, most HR departments now have formulated some sort of a reward strategy, and this strategy formulation primarily is done by studying the key things, studying the key aspects of the organization. One is the employees, their skill set, their prior experience, and their motivation in terms of working on that role and responsibility to deliver that objective. And that is a part and parcel of what is called the reward strategy. Now, how this can be implemented, I've given an example here that when you look at say for example a strategy being put into place, you will normally see that the business objectives are delivered down to HR department. The HR department then distills down those objectives to the individual job descriptions of key result areas, and then these key results areas are then with the help of line managers or your managers distilled down further into how you're going to be looking at delivering that objective. So, and then at some stage, there's a bit of a test plan or a preparation which is done, to ensure that this reward plan is actually acceptable and is a stretch plan or is a plan which basically keeps the employees motivated and is something which there is a buy-in from the employees to be able to work and go after that plan. And once that is done, you basically look at implementing it, and then at the end of the year, there's a bit of a review modification which is done to see if it was achieved, not achieved, was it overtly ambitious, or was it something which was easily achieved? So you reset these targets, so that that same reward management strategy could be implemented again in a slightly different format in the coming years. And as an example, what I've done is I've put together a small matrix here which basically highlights that if you look at a reward management plan to be put in place, what we normally see is that when you look at corporate leaders or people in the top management, you will see that they normally have some sort of a plan which is related to shareholding or getting shares of the organization. Now, in some cases, when you look at business leaders or people who are managing strategic business unit, their key aspect is to look at profitability. When you look at leaders who basically manage day-to-day functions, their key contribution is primarily towards the achievement of goals which have been set. And when you look at general employees or staff working within the organization, they are more tuned to achieving their key result areas, which are a part and parcel of their job description. And when you look at the basis of rewards, the rewards basically change depending on the type of grading that you are within the organization. And then if I relate this to the key result areas and also look at in general how these rewards are measured, or how the HR department looks at basically measuring these awards, then you put things into place which basically talk about things like what is the financial or the economic value to which the individual has been given to be able to achieve, and is there a contribution. So sometimes you will see sales roles which directly contribute towards the revenue of the company, and their key performance is primarily looking at meeting that sales goal or the revenue goal. Some people would be working on qualitative goal, and that qualitative goal will be that they will need to achieve the profitability margin which is set for a particular product. So when you look at product managers within an organization, what you will see is the product managers work on the profitability goal for the organization, the market share goal for the organization. But when you look at the sales managers within the same organization who are selling those products and services, their main KRA or main goal is to primarily look at achieving the sales targets which have been set. So in order to balance the two, you look at different types of reward mechanisms which are put in place within the organization, and these tend to then differentiate between the two, and that's how an effective reward management strategy actually works within an organization. So with this, presentation, I hope you've understood, in an overview, what is the key, reasons why we look at understanding performance and reward management and how they are put into place within an organization, in general, and some of the theories and some of the frameworks which are required for you to understand and, crystallize these concepts. Now, in addition to this, what I've also done is I have a handout which I've prepared, which is a bit of an extract, from the book, and it talks about, so this is a paper which is a recent study which talks about, performance management within an organization, and here, it will be a good read for you to look at understanding how performance management is done and what are the key aspects of, performance management. And the one that I want you to read in particular when you log into the Moodle would be the reward management handout, which is about 10 to 12 pages. And here, the idea would be to try and understand performance, reward management, and the philosophy behind it, and the theoretical frameworks behind it, why organizations use this as a technique, especially the HR use this as a technique to get, loyalty, get the employees motivated, get the commitment and engagement from them while they're executing their roles and responsibilities or the key result areas given as per the job description. So I hope this particular session has given you some insight into the learning outcome 1, and I hope to catch up with you in the next session, which is tomorrow. And if you have any questions, any queries in the meanwhile, please feel free to send them via email, and I'll come back to you with some additional information. Thanks very much for joining, and bye for now.